The URC returns this weekend after a month-long hiatus. My name's Mark. Let's talk rugby. The international window for November is closed. Yes, there is one more game, Wales versus South Africa, which will have an effect on some of these games. It's officially outside of that window, though. So our focus is going to go back onto, domestic issues here. There are, some big games this weekend. One absolutely massive top of the table clash as well. So a lot to look forward to in the URC. And it's going to be interesting as well to see, we had that first set of 5 games. Certain teams got a bit of momentum. Other teams had poor starts to the season. Players have either gone away with their, national sides, or they've been, in camp getting ready for this set of games here now. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who keeps their momentum going from before the break, who finds new momentum, and who completely loses it. So, lots of kind of happenings, I think, this weekend going to tell us just how teams are going to be for that. And then also, we've got the whole thing of now we're into a period where we're going to have the European like Champions Cup and Challenge Cup games mixed in as well with the URC round. So it's not going to be like a solid block the way it was in the run up to the November test. So a lot of kind of different factors in there, and how teams go about resting players maybe for bigger games, etc., and how that's going to affect them. But let's have a look at these fixtures. The usual thing we talk about, each of the teams, where they are in the table, what their form's been like so far this season, and how I think the game is going to go. So we've got 2 games on Friday. So first up, we've got Ulster versus Benetton, 7:45 kickoff. That's Irish time, so look up your local time for that. And this one, you got 2 teams who kind of, you look at the start of the season, I think Ulster certainly had the better start. Benetton had a decent patch, but have to find a little bit more, I think. But Ulster started the season, 3 wins on the bounce. They obviously had that game against Edinburgh that was called off as well in that period where they kind of had a week with no game, and then they finish off then with that first loss of the season against the Lions down in South Africa. But still, they'd feel like they'd decent momentum coming off that that block, and now back at home looking to kind of restart that as well from here. They're looking like a side that really picked things up compared to last season. And we look at the fixtures they had so far this season. So beat the Dragons first up, that was by 21 points. Then beat the Bulls as well by 21. Different ones though, because I think it was 42-21 against Dragons, and then 28-7 against the Bulls. Then they beat the Sharks away. Always good for any side to be able to go to South Africa and pick up a win, because it's not an easy thing to do. And then that defeat, as I said, the first defeat of the season against the Lions, who just happened to pick up their form as well for those first 2 home games of their season. So 3 from 4 from Ulster. They do have kind of that game in hand, but it is away to Edinburgh. So, it's certainly wouldn't look at it as a guaranteed win, but they still have that in the back of their minds though as well. They're trying to stay in the mix at the moment. They're 5th in the table. Then we have Benetton, who've won 2 of their first 5 games, and they're sitting down at 10th place in the table on 9 points. So, and Ulster on 16. So Benetton, even with a bonus point win and also getting nothing, can't actually leapfrog Ulster, but they can get fairly close to them, just a point behind if they manage that. But Benetton started the season, didn't look great in the opening game, losing away to Connacht, lost up by 11 points. Then they get it home and just complete transformation. They beat Glasgow by 2 points there. You know, I think it was a penalty to win the game in the last, if I'm right. It was either a penalty or conversion. I think it was a penalty though. In the last minute of the game or something to win that one. And then they backed it up then by beating the Lions by 26 points. So looking like they're back in a bit of form, but then got absolutely hockeyed by Edinburgh by 43 points and then lost to the Stormers by 15. No shame in losing to the Stormers, because Stormers were, one of the form teams of the URC in that first block of games as well. So a much more mixed start to the season, I'd say, for Benetton. And, what we're not seeing from them, in the last kind of year, I'd say, or so, well, not quite a year, because they were competitive before Christmas last year, but coming on to close to that, is that we're not seeing them being competitive away from home the way we have seen them in recent seasons. Even the start of last season they were, and then definitely the season before that as well. So definite work-ons there to actually get that, in the squad again, because, it's difficult, really, the motivation of being able to go away from home and be competitive consistently. So yeah, it feels like they need to go away and get a result somewhere. Maybe, that's going to spark it, rather than being able to just kind of, it's very hard to manufacture that in the training environment, really. But I said Ulster home will be confident, and because of that, I'm going to back Ulster for a win in that first game. And then at the same time, we have Dragons versus Leinster, 7:45 kickoff. This one is at Rodney Parade, and you can see this one if you're watching in Ireland on TG Cahir as well, as it's going to be on Premier Sports, URC TV, etc. as well. And the Ulster Benetton game is on Premier and URC TV. And I think all of the games this weekend, with the exception of one, is on both Premier Sports and URC TV, and we'll deal with that one when we come to it. But we've got the Dragons. There's obviously the talk about, Wales. The WU decided that they're going to go down to 3 regions instead of 4. But by the way they're talking about it, is that the Dragons possibly could be safe, because they're talking about basically Cardiff will be safe. Geographically, Dragons will be safe, and then it's between Scarlets and Ospreys. Is probably going to be the one that goes away. I've said it many times, I don't want any of them to go away. But still, Dragons, they've got to pick things up, because eventually, even if they're not the ones to go this time, if they keep on the same trajectory, there will be calls, I think, for Wales then to subsequently go down to 2 regions instead, because they'd be looking at, what benefit are we getting from having the Dragons, really. And that's the thing for them. That's why I think they've got to start picking up now, when the kind of the axe is hovering above your head, it's a bit too late, honestly. So yeah, I think that they need to start picking things up. But against Leinster, a Leinster team who, yes, they've had a poor start to the season, but you would expect that will have a little bit of momentum coming into this now. That not sure how many of the Irish internationals will be in this game. Certainly of the ones that played in the window, there probably will be still a lot of Ireland internationals, because there's a lot of Ireland internationals at Leinster who currently aren't in the Ireland squad but have previously represented Ireland. So that'll be interesting to see there. But looking at the form, Dragons, 2 draws from the first 5 games, no wins. Started with that loss away to Ulster. Then that draw against the Sharks in crazy weather during the storm. Then heavy defeat by 49 points against Glasgow. They backed it up, or followed it up, with a 7-point defeat against Cardiff. Looked a lot more competitive in that game. And then they got that draw against Ospreys as well last time out. So, for Dragons, it's honestly, not a terrible start to the season. Last year, I think they won their first game, and then, it took them a long time to pick anything up after that, for the rest of the season. So, if in this block they can pick up maybe another couple of draws or a win, draws apparently rare in rugby, but not for the Dragons for some reason. But yeah, if they could pick up a win during this block here, I think you would see a little bit in terms of like they're not going to get kind of dropped by the rest of the league, which has happened for them, the last few seasons, pretty early in the season. And then they're playing against Leinster, who again didn't have a very good start to the season at all. Beaten 35-0 against Stormers in the opening game, then closer against the Bulls, but they were leading in that game against the Bulls with 20 minutes to go or something, and then the Bulls took it away from them. So that wasn't a good sign from them. Then a lot of the some of the big names come back for that game against the Sharks, then to win that by 26. A lot more come back again for the game against Munster, where Munster completely outplayed them. Brilliant performance from Munster, very poor from Leinster, and that's when really for a lot of, I think, Irish fans, the alarm bells started ringing about that game against, for Ireland against the All Blacks in Chicago at the start of the November window. And then the internationals go away into camp, and they beat Zebre pretty comfortably in the last game of the window. So just 2 wins from 5 from them this season, which, we've seen Leinster go through seasons and, losing 3 games in the entire season, has happened for them. And even in recent seasons when, last year, obviously, they picked up a trophy, but in seasons before that, we've seen them going through, the entire regular season, maybe only losing once or twice, and then losing semi-finals or finals or whatever only. So to have already lost 3 games this season, it means it's more adversity than this Leinster team are used to facing. But if they can get into a bit of a stride and stuff like that, they will get themselves back up towards the pointy end of the table. But that starts with this game here, really, in terms of just reigniting themselves and also getting themselves ready for Europe, because they're always looking to fight on those 2 fronts. And, with Leinster being the only URC team that has kind of, since the URC has come about, really being the only URC team, I think, to have seen a semi-final in those 3 years so far, wherever it is, 4 years, is a big thing as well. They want to keep that going, but from a URC point of view, obviously we want to see more teams from the URC making semi-finals and finals in the Champions Cup. But for this one, I think, Leinster, it's probably not going to be their strongest team that they send over to Rodney Parade, but I still think they'll have enough to, even with all their woes, they still have enough to take the win in that one. Okay, those are the Friday games. And on to the Saturday games. So the early game, 12 o'clock kickoff, is a South African derby. So you got the Vodacom Bulls versus the Lions at Loftus Versfeld, again on Premier Sports and URC TV for this one. And it's a good clash of a game, really, this one, because you got the Bulls, who started the season very well, like had that bit of a hiccup against Ulster, and then kind of finished off, not great in terms of the last game. Kind of, it was kind of a showdown between themselves and Glasgow for who was going to stay in that kind of top 4 at the pointy end of the table. And unfortunately for the Bulls, they come out the wrong side. But, their form so far this season, beat the Ospreys by 13 points at home to start off. Then they beat Leinster, as we talked about, by 8 points, coming from behind to win that one. Then, well beaten against Ulster in the first game on the European Tour. Then they beat Connacht by a point. Some good grit to win that one. And then followed up then 9-point defeat to Glasgow. So, been showing decent form so far this season. One thing would be, though, is like, even when they were winning the games, they were still conceding a lot of points. And that's kind of, been a bit of an issue for them this year on the defensive side of things. The attack seems to be firing pretty well. But yeah, defensively, not as maybe where they'd want to be. Then the Lions, they European Tour didn't go all that well. Beaten by Cardiff by 13 points first up. Then 2-point loss to Zebre. And then a 26-point loss to Benetton. Then they get home and they beat the Scarlets by 11 points and follow up with a very good win against Ulster by 18 points there. So they, for them, they had that real momentum going before the international break, and probably certainly one of the teams, I think, that didn't want that break to come when it did. And now they've got to try and start things again. And I think this game, given the way both teams have been this year, is probably going to be one of those ones where it's a high-scoring game from both teams. But I think the Bulls, being at home in Loftus, they should take it the win for that and just kind of get themselves, back up into that kind of top 4 or well, they can't get back up in the top 4. Sorry, there's 6 at the moment, but they're 6 points behind Cardiff. But certainly up there, knocking on the door again on that one. Then the Lions, who at the minute are in 8th place, they're in that kind of position where if they do lose this one, they could easily go from 8th place down to like 12th or something like that. So, for them, there is a lot at stake in terms of just keep that momentum going in the season, because they've found it very hard to do that. In recent seasons, we've seen them have purple patches and produce some great rugby, but we haven't seen a Lions team that has really been in there, like, up there in the mix, well inside the playoff places, certainly deep into the season. So, we'll have to see something different from them, really. And, going away to Loftus and getting a win there certainly would be a good start for that. But for me, again, I think I'm going to go for a Bulls win in that one. Okay, then we're on to the 1 o'clock kickoff. This is Zebre Parma versus Cardiff Rugby. It's at the Stadio Sergio Lanfranchi, and again on Premier Sports and URC TV. And, this is an interesting one because you got like Zebre, who had a very good start to the season, and Cardiff, who have had an excellent start to the season. So, two teams who, bit of a crossroads, really, I think, for their seasons. This game, a win for either team here, really does get them some decent momentum again coming into this block of games. So you got Zebre, who started with back-to-back wins. So first up, to beat Edinburgh by 3 points. That was a really big result for them. And then backed it up with a win against the Lions as well. Then they go away to Ospreys, and I'm pretty sure it's 24-0. They lost by 24 points, but I'm pretty sure they were nilled in that game. Then they lose against the Stormers again. Like, Stormers, just one of those teams that they beat everyone they played in the first group. And then another tough game after that, then, going against a wounded Leinster side. But they looked decent in that game. Probably the best I've seen them away from home in a while in that one. So, not a terrible showing from them in that one. They were a bit powder puff in some of their other away performances this year, but that certainly wasn't one of them. like that, that game against Ospreys, I think that was certainly a worse performance from them. And then Cardiff, again, stellar start to the season. So they start off beating the Lions by 13 points, then narrow loss against Munster. And, looking at that game, you think like Cardiff had chances to win that game and it probably should have done. And that's going to be part of the learning, I think, for, it's overall a pretty young profile in that squad. And then come back from that, then they beat Connacht. From there, I think a few of the lessons learned maybe from the Munster game got them to that win. Then they beat the Dragons after that and follow up, like finished off then with a 1-point win against Edinburgh. So, nice run there, 3 games on the bounce. And again, I think like the Lions, another team who did not want that break to come when it did, because they were on such a good run of form. And, players being away and then coming back into camp, and everything can get muddled and mixed up, in terms of just trying to keep that consistent messaging and the standards, but also the style of play and that kind of thing can be a bit difficult with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go here. With this one, obviously not going to have everybody available because Wales are playing this weekend. But I think if they can go away there and get a win there, it's a weird one, because Zebre, you go back even just a couple of seasons ago. Well, no, Zebre were even 2 or 3 seasons ago, they were showing signs. But if you go back a little bit further than that, like the pre-URC era, say, or even the first year of the URC, pretty much every team saw Zebre on the fixture list and thought, we can change as many players we want and we're still going to get a bonus point win. And now nobody thinks that anymore. That's how much Zebre have improved over that period. So I expect, Cardiff are going to go there. Nobody's going to get ambushed by Zebre anymore, because if you get beaten by Zebre, it's not a shock anymore, is the thing. So going to go there, and I think it's going to be a tough game. And this is probably one of the hardest games of the weekend to call, honestly. And I'm kind of, even in my head now, I'm trying to decide which way. I'm flip-flopping between the two, but I always say I'm never going to pick a draw when I do predictions. So I'm going to go for Zebre to just about win it. But Cardiff probably come away with 2 bonus points out of it. I think that's probably going to be fair enough on that one. But, again, I could see either team winning that game. On to the next one then. So we're into the big game of the weekend. Munster versus the Stormers. Munster versus DHL Stormers. It's a 5:30 kickoff. It's at Thomond Park in Limerick. And it's top of the table. It's first versus second. A massive, massive game. This one is billed as being on Premier Sports. So maybe they have exclusivity for this game, or I'm not sure. It doesn't say it's on URC TV. Doesn't mean it's not going to be on URC TV. I'll have to check it to see. But I'll definitely be watching this game. I don't know how many games I get to cover this weekend, but this will definitely be one that I do. And then after that, then we'll have to see. I'll probably do one of the Friday night games, probably Leinster, because I'm a Leinster fan. And then we'll see if we can cover some of the other games or the weekend, maybe one of the later games as well on Saturday. But yeah, this is a massive, massive game. Again, 2 teams in really good form before that break, and probably didn't want that to come really for them. And yeah, again, going to be interesting to see how they're affected by that. Stormers, obviously, players away with the Springboks as well. They're going to be affected by that too. But you look at the quality that they have in their squad, and even when you take the Springboks out, there's still tons of quality there. That and players with plenty, either plenty of test caps or players who you probably think in the next year or so will be getting test caps as well. That's the quality that they have there. Munster quality certainly has improved over the last couple of seasons. Getting more representation in Ireland certainly would be a lot of arguments as well about they probably should be getting more representation that they're getting at the moment. They've got a lot of really good youngsters coming through, especially in their pack. And so it's going to be, again, just a very interesting matchup here. If we look at how the team's gone through so far this season, so you got Munster started with 13-point win away to the Scarlets. Then they beat Cardiff by 3 points. That was away as well. Then beat Edinburgh by a point. And again, I was talking about that before, when it happened, that Edinburgh must be scratching their heads how the hell they didn't win that game. Then they produced probably their performance of the season, or certainly I think their performance of the season, and probably the performance of the season so far in the URC, beating Leinster at Croke Park by 17 points. Just absolutely, took them to town there. And then finished off then with a 2-point win against Connacht. Connacht very competitive in that game. So 5-5 from them. And then so they're at the moment sitting in second place. Then the Stormers, the only team above them, start off with that, hammering of Leinster in the first game at home. Then they beat the Ospreys by 16 points. Then they go on the road. They beat Scarlets by 34, beat Zebre by 18, and then they beat Benetton by 15. So no team really getting anywhere close to Stormers so far this season. And, but still, this is going to be a big test for them against Munster. You got, and not just because it's not just a form thing either, because you look at the results and you think Munster are in as good form as the Stormers are. And I would argue that they weren't, that there was, there were a few of those performances where they weren't actually playing all that great, but they had that ability that when they weren't at their best to get the results. So I think that's one thing that's going to really stand by them, especially that one against Edinburgh. Yes, Edinburgh got 4 yellow cards in the game, but Munster just stuck in. When Edinburgh were absolutely dominating everything, Munster stuck in. Defence was brilliant. They took their chances and they come out with the win. And, we've seen it a couple of times this season where they were able to do that. And, a team that when they're not at their best but can pull out a win, I think is a better prospect in terms of how the rest of the season might go than a team who are in amazing form and are beating everybody left and right, simply because for the likes of Munster, you think, well, if the former performances aren't there, but they're winning, the confidence is going to build and the performance will come later. And then that will, on its own, have another kind of glut of wins for them on the back of that. Whereas the Stormers, if the form goes away, we haven't seen them in a real dogfight yet this season. So can they dig in those kind of situations? We've seen in the past, absolutely they can. But season to season, it can be very different in this league in terms of whether teams are able to actually reproduce that kind of thing as well. They certainly have the players to do it. The players to go anywhere, beat anyone at the minute, and there's a reason why they were like the inaugural URC champions, because of that ability to do that kind of thing. But again, a Munster team with that confidence, and you would expect the Munster team is going to be a little bit stronger in terms of compared to their best team. Not saying stronger than the Stormers, but compared to their best team, you would expect maybe a little bit stronger than maybe the Stormers are, just because some of the Stormers will still be away with the Springboks. But then I think you've also got another factor in here, which for me would be, had Crowley, Munster's 10 before the break. He's basically schooling Prendergast and the Leinster boys, 2 games before the break. He then goes into camp for Ireland. Munster, then they win the next game as well after that, with him not there. But now he's come back and he's gone from before the international window being the guy that everyone thought, he's Ireland's first choice 10, to finishing the window back in second choice again. So that could be a bit of a factor there, just in terms of confidence. But I think as a young guy, he's probably got plenty of confidence, and he seems to deal with that kind of adversity very well too. So, he may feel like, again, he's got to prove himself again and again with this kind of stuff, and maybe that's going to feed into his performance as well. And, like the previous game, the Zebre Cardiff game, this is kind of equally another game that's kind of difficult to call. But Munster being at home, Thomond Park, and again, just that ability that they've had so far this season to dig out results when maybe, they're being outperformed. I think it might be a factor in this one. So I'm going to go for a Munster win. Okay. So on to the next game. So Edinburgh versus Ospreys on at the same time. So 5:30 kickoff. This is at the Hive Stadium, and it's on Premier Sport and URC TV. And, this, we talked about 2 top of the table clash, first and second, Munster and Stormers. This is a very different clash here. We got 11th versus 14th, and 2 teams who haven't had the best start to the season and really do need a win to get a bit of confidence back really into the squads, I think, just in terms of being able to carry that through into European games, but also for the rest of this block as well. So, we look at Edinburgh lost to Zebre, first up by 3 points. Then that loss away to Munster when they absolutely should have won the game. Then they destroy Benetton, their only win of the season so far, by 43 points. And then they can't back that up. They lose to Cardiff by a point. So 1 win from 4 so far from Edinburgh. They had that game called off against Ulster because of the storm that time. And then Ospreys start off, they look decent down in South Africa, despite, not picking up any points, but lose against the Bulls by 13 points, but they scored 40 or 40 something points, but also conceded 50 something points as well. So, defense a bit of an issue there. And then again, looking competitive against the Stormers, but still losing by 16 points there. Then they get home, they beat Zebre 24-0. And it looks like that competitiveness that they had in those first couple of games is maybe going to see them to, some decent results, once they return to Europe. But then they against Glasgow next up, they lose by 25 points. And you're thinking, well, it's a bit, they're too much up and down, really. And then they're going against the Dragons, and they end up with a draw, and when you would have thought that's the game really that they needed to win to give themselves that little bit of a boost. If they had won that game, they would have been, I think on the same amount of points as Edinburgh at this stage of the season. And then this one would have simply have been the winner of the game basically gets up there either just about into the playoff spots or right on the tail end of that as well. So, still with a decent chance, to move up the table if they do win, because they will leapfrog Edinburgh at least, if they win this game. But yeah, it would have been a little bit nicer, I think, for them to be coming in on 2 wins instead of the win and the draw out of their 5 games so far. And looking at it as well, Edinburgh at home, I think there's going to be some real confidence there, because generally Edinburgh at home perform a lot better than they do away. Yes, they're along with Connacht, one of the most inconsistent teams in the whole league, but I still think at the Hive they're going to produce a performance, and I'm going to back them for the win in that one. Okay, so on to then the final 2 games of the weekend. So these are both 7:45 kickoffs. The first is Connacht versus the Hollywood Bet Sharks at the Dexcom Stadium. This one on Premier Sport, URC TV, but also on TG Car for anyone watching in Ireland. And 2 teams that are pretty much like neck and neck in the table. Connacht in 12th, Sharks in 13th. The Sharks, like last year, they took the league seriously, and they finished in the top 8, got themselves into the playoff. They had lots of fun in the playoffs as well, with the shenanigans that went on with them. But this year, again, kind of languishing down. Yes, it's early in the season, but you look at the likes of the Stormers and the Bulls, who are both up there in the top 6. The Sharks nowhere near that form so far this season. So we look at the form of the teams. Connacht, they started the season pretty well. 11-point win against Benetton, looked pretty good in that game. Then they go away to Cardiff, lose by 6 points, and then against the Bulls, then at home they lose by a point, and then they lose to Munster by 2 points. I think that game was down in Cork for that one. And you look at or was that at home? I can't remember actually. Let me just double check where that game was. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was down in Cork. Yeah, I was right. But yeah, you look at that kind of form for them. Not brilliant so far this season, and you've got Stuart Lancaster in there. He's obviously trying to bring the guys on a bit, and you can certainly see some of his influence there. It's still early in his tenure. We've seen, like with Ulster, it took basically Richie Murphy had like a year and a half prior to this season to get his guys to the point now where they're starting to look a bit competitive this season. And that was that was an Ulster team who had been, before kind of they fell off the cliff, obviously had been consistently competitive in the league, whereas Connacht have always been, certainly in the URC era, have been a team that are very inconsistent and always seem to be, just about in the playoffs or outside of the playoffs by a win or two, say. That's kind of the window they operate in. We never really see them being up there near the pointy end of the table, kind of comfortably, qualifying for playoffs, etc. So that's what he's working with there. So he's got, and one of his big jobs is get these guys to be more consistent, not just from game to game, but winning games as well. There seems to be, I don't know whether it's a concentration issue or whatever, but they seem to be able to, have a purple patch where they can score, 2 or 3 tries in maybe a 10-minute period, and then they can equally concede 2 or 3 tries in a 10-minute period. And that's, again, not just a one-off kind of thing happens to them, it happens to them a lot. So definitely a lot of work-ons there for him. And then you look at the Sharks, obviously, again, probably got a lot of players, away with the Springboks at the minute, but they do have like a quality group of players there as well. And, it's going to be interesting to see, can they now, get themselves another win this season, because they've only got the one so far. And if we look at their form, so they started off, losing to Glasgow by 16 points. Then they got to draw away to the Dragons, but I still say everybody within the Sharks would have looked at that and thought that was going to be a win before they played the game. Then they lose against, by 26 points against a Leinster team who were in terrible form. Then, after that, lose to Ulster as well. And then finally they get a win against Scarlets, so that at least they got that win there. But, it hasn't been, again, a brilliant start to the season from them. And, compared to, like, the Bulls and the Stormers, you could definitely see, the Bulls or the Stormers going to the Dexcom. Like, the Bulls did it already. And you could definitely see, the Stormers doing it as well, going there and getting a win. Whereas the Sharks, it's almost like, are they going to be up for the game kind of thing? You kind of, sometimes it looks like in the URC, obviously no player is out there thinking, we don't want to win the game. But you just think that, like, the Stormers players and the Bulls players certainly, and to an extent, the Lions players, because again, the Lions have their own issue with being consistent, but certainly the Stormers and the Bulls players, you just think that they want a little bit more maybe at this level compared to the Sharks, and they seem to get results that the Sharks don't, because of just that extra little bit desire. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Sharks really do want to, because the weather here in Ireland recently has been fairly rough. I don't know what the forecast is for Saturday night, but given that it's going to be in Galway, you would expect it's going to be windy and rainy. would be my guess. And I'm not saying like I'm Nostradamus or anything like that, because generally this time of the year, nighttime in Galway, it's probably a safe bet that it's going to be fairly windy and rainy at some point as well. So, can they go there and do it in that weather? But again, you've got the Connacht factor, that Connacht are not consistent enough to kind of, look at a team like the Sharks who aren't in great form and think, okay, well, as long as we do X, Y, and Z, we should come out with a win. They're just not at that level at the minute. So it's one, again, that can go either way. But Connacht being at home, I'm going to back Connacht for the win in that one. Okay, so then we're on to the last game of this round. So it's Scarlets versus Glasgow. Again, the 7:45 kickoff. It's in Parky Scarlets on Premier Sports and on URC TV. So you got basically bottom of the table versus third in the table. So, it's the biggest disparity between any two teams. This round, like, you've got 1 and 2 are playing each other. So, like, Glasgow are next up in third place, and Scarlets are rock bottom of the table. So you can't get a bigger difference at the minute, like, with these fixtures here. So a daunting task, even at home for Scarlets. And again, you got the whole thing of the WRU saying we're going to get rid of one of the teams, and you have the Scarlets who not only haven't won so far this season or gotten a draw, they haven't picked up any match points at all. So that's the big worry. And they're, like, last year, it's night and day really. Like, last year they had that ability just to stick in games, and if they weren't winning the game, they were picking up a losing bonus point, and maybe they they would pick up 2 because a lot of the games, they could be high scoring as well on top of that. But they were winning a lot of close games as well. And they were building that as, it looked like that this season, for me, I thought, looking at how they went last season, they got into the playoffs. Pretty sure they finished 8th. And I thought, okay, they're going to kick on from there. But instead, they did pretty much what Ospreys did last season, because Ospreys 2 seasons ago had that miracle 2% chance winning the last 2 and getting into the playoffs. And then last season, went backwards. And Scarlets seem to be doing the same this season. Now, again, it's early in the season, especially for them, because they've only played actually 4 games, because their game against Connacht was called off on the same weekend as the Ulster, or the Edinburgh Ulster game was called off because of the same storm. So it's not like a complete disaster of a season yet, but bottom of the table, you're 6 points behind the Dragons, who are the next team up the table. So even if you win this with a bonus point, you're still going to be bottom of the table. Is really not a good look for them. And with the Scarlets, they've always had that ability. Ball playing skill is never really a doubt with the Scarlets. They've always been able to throw the ball around. They score worldly tries, but it's that kind of that bit of dog, the fight in their pack. Getting that set piece right. Last season they seem to have gotten it right. This year, again, it's kind of gone back to the seasons before that. And the fact that you're playing against Glasgow, who are one of the most consistent teams in the league. Like, Glasgow, you look at previous years, always finish in the top 4, previous champions as well. And this year as well, that they've been on decent form at the moment. And again, in 3rd place in the league. And for them, this is a big opportunity as well, because Stormers and Munster are playing each other, which means that, one of those teams is going to lose that. If Glasgow can win here, Glasgow can go 2nd at the table and then be putting pressure on whoever's won that game as well. So another big opportunity for them. So, again, let's just look at how Scarlets first of all start. So defeat the Munster first up by 13 points at home. Then they lose to the Storms by 34 points at home. Then lose to the Lions by 11 points. And then they lose to the Sharks by 10 points. So, not really getting close to anyone. They're not within, not even, yes, 11 and 10 points. If they had got another score, another try at least in one of those, they might have got themselves a losing bonus point, but that's as close as they got, within a score of losing by 7 or less. Is not a brilliant start to the season for anyone. And then you're looking at Glasgow, who beat the Sharks by 16 points first up. Then they had a loss away to Benetton, which, looking at the rest of the games, really does look like just a blip, but lost that by 2 points. Then they beat the Dragons by 49. They beat Ospreys by 26. And then they beat the Bulls by 9 points. So, they've had some really good performances so far this season. They're going to have players coming back from Scotland. Scotland had a very mixed November series. I think it's fair to say, start with a big win against the URC, finish with a big win against Tonga, and then, that game against the All Blacks, where they're 10 points down, coming close to half time, lose concentration, go in 70 points down, start the second half brilliantly, get themselves back level, and then can't go again to potentially beat the All Blacks for the first time. Off the back of that, then they're beating Argentina by 14 points at half time and end up losing the game. So, yeah, very mixed for them. So any Scotland players coming back in probably will feel like they've got a little bit to prove there as well, and get them, and they'll probably be happy to be back. For me, it feels at least that the Glasgow environment is a more conducive environment for the players to perform, in bigger games than the Scotland environment. That, at least as an outsider, feels like that, whatever Gregor Townsend and his guys are doing doesn't seem to be able to get the players to that level where they can kind of take that next step in the development. Whereas, at Glasgow, it feels like they actually have, especially with that URC, lifting the URC trophy there a couple of seasons ago, felt like they have taken that next step now, and they have that little bit extra in the bank in terms of being able to cope with those kind of situations. And I think looking at an opportunity like this, it really is perfect for them. And because of that, I'm going to go for a Glasgow win there. Okay, so that's a preview for this weekend's fixtures. Let me know what you think down in the comments.